At CIA headquarters in the summer of 1953, Alan Dulles, the agency's director, recruits E. Howard Hunt as his propaganda chief in the plot to oust Arbenz.
And they took me into a small room in the agency and swore me a special oath. I must never tell what they were going to tell me.
The Americans' strongest ally inside Guatemala is the Catholic Church. The CIA contacts Cardinal Spellman in New York to take part in their psychological war against Arbenz. The Cardinal uses his authority to enlist the full cooperation of the head of the Guatemalan Church, Archbishop Arellano.
Cardinal Spellman convinced his counterpart in Guatemala to issue a pastoral letter several months before the coup, in which the Cardinal basically spelled out his message to the flock that they should rise up against the communists in Guatemala and overthrow them. And then the CIA took that pastoral letter and airlifted it around Guatemala.
We had gotten the okay from Cardinal Spellman to go ahead with this, and I wouldn't presume to trace the lines of authority within the Catholic Church, how they get their information, but they do. And we've always said, you know, in an admiring way, that the Jesuits form the greatest intelligence service in the world, always have. The Jesuits form the greatest intelligence service in the world, always have. The Jesuits form the greatest intelligence service in the world, always have.
Number 1. Google. One of the most recognizable brands today. We know them from the operating system on our phones, to their smart home devices, to Google Search, Google Maps and Gmail, and even YouTube itself. They're an organization that's so prevalent that they're almost invisible. And the other thing that this episode is about is the CIA, the same organization that overthrows foreign governments and spies on leaders and citizens. From human rights violations to drug trafficking, the CIA has always been shrouded in mystery and controversy. So what does Google have to do with the CIA? Well, many people may not realize this, but the CIA was directly involved in the foundation of Google. Google co-founder Sergey Brin even reported to representatives of the US intelligence community on his progress. Not only this, but the application that became Google Earth originally had CIA investment. Generally, this is a concerning relationship, but in this episode, we're going to take a deeper look. First of all, let's take a brief look at the CIA.
You are watching Cold Fusion TV.
After World War II, the United States would face the Soviets in a battle for world supremacy. The invention of the atomic bomb meant that no weapons could be fired in this war, so other methods had to be used. Over the next 40 years, a period known as the Cold War would begin. No shooting, just subversive tactics. In the mid-1940s, the President of the United States, inspired by the efforts of the UK's MI6 during World War II, would sign the National Security Act, which formed the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA. And right away, the CIA would get to work interfering in international politics. In an effort to stave off communist influence on the global stage, the CIA would interfere with the 1948 Italian elections. They would overthrow the governments of Iran and Guatemala in 1954, Indonesia in 1957, and Brazil in 1964. The CIA also conducted some rather questionable projects on their own people. Project MKUltra, for example, was the CIA's mind control program using, quote, chemical, biological, and radiological methods. Many of the studies within MKUltra focused on the administration of LSD to prisoners, drug addicts, mental patients, along with government agents and the general public, all without their consent.
Documents pried loose in 1979 showed that through a front organization, the Central Intelligence Agency funded what was called the MK Ultra Project.
The CIA wanted to understand more about brainwashing. It had money and it was ready to fund experiments, breaking down the mind with repeated electric shocks and drugs, including massive doses of LSD.
These experiments were done without the informed consent of the patients.
Lawyer Alan Stein took up some of the rejected cases. The government's paid a number of settlements since. Many of the payments come with non-disclosure agreements.
They're trying to do it quietly.
It's not fair. I mean, I feel blessed that I was able to get this far for my parents. I really do. That's what gives me justice. I'm just grateful to be able to do it, and I hope I just hope that you can hear me up there, because it might bring you peace. It might bring you both peace.
Ultimately, the CIA's goal of using LSD as a mind-altering weapon against the Soviet Union and other enemies never reached fruition. But by the time the project was disbanded in the mid-1960s, hundreds of people were unknowingly drugged and observed. I found this last one pretty entertaining. One of the most embarrassing failures of the CIA was the attempted assassination of Cuba's Fidel Castro.
So, in interviews, Fidel Castro used to say, if surviving assassination attempts were an Olympic sport, I would win the gold medal. Reportedly, more than 600 attempts over his 50 years in power. Now, many of the failed plots were concocted by the CIA.
The CIA tried infecting Castro's scuba gear with tuberculosis, planting exploding seashells at his favorite diving site, slipping him a poisoned fountain pen. They even tried poisoning and slipping a bomb into one of his cigars. All of these attempts were a failure. It was a gigantic waste of time and money, and Fidel Castro was Cuba's dictator for another 49 years, stepping down in 2008 only due to failing health. This is all to say, the CIA may seem formidable, but when it comes down to it, they're not always perfect. With the Soviet Union gone, the CIA's actions today may be less well known, but their influence on the world certainly hasn't gone away. And that brings us to their relationship with Google. In 1994, two PhD students, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, began working on their automated web crawling and page ranking application as part of their research project. They had bet on making the exploding internet easy to access, and it paid off enormously. Sergey Brin's part of the Stanford research was funded by the NSA and CIA. Brin would often report progress to non-Stanford individuals, one of whom was Dr. Rick Steinheiser. Steinheiser represented the CIA's Office for Research and Development to oversee their research funding in a joint CIA-NSA program. It wasn't uncommon at the time for research projects to be funded by the intelligence community. Government intelligence agencies had set up programs and often seed-funded projects. Roughly $3 to $4 million of funding flowed through the intelligence community programs into universities. And while both Google and the intelligence community deny that the CIA directly funded the start of Google, it's evident that the intelligence community's research funding helped not only Google, but Silicon Valley as a whole. There are many ways this relationship is built and preserved. One of the biggest is perhaps the Highlands Forum. There's a good chance that you've never heard of this forum, but it connects the wider Department of Defense and the intelligence community to the tech startups. This keeps the military and the intelligence community at the cutting edge of tech. Many executives on the Highland Forum hold positions in the CIA, NSA, and many other agencies. Movements from these agencies into Silicon Valley is common. For example, in 2012, the Highlands co-chair, who also worked at DARPA, left the agency to accept a senior executive position at Google. In an email thread made public, Sergey Brin discussed information sharing for the purposes of national security with the head of the NSA. In 1999, at the peak of the dot-com boom, the CIA launched In-Q-Tel, a Silicon Valley venture capital fund. Its mission was to invest in startups that aligned with intelligence agencies' needs. In 2003, the CIA, through In-Q-Tel, would invest in Keyhole. Keyhole was a startup that built 3D global mapping software. One of its first uses was to support US troops during Operation Iraqi Freedom, the campaign to overthrow Saddam Hussein. The next year, Google bought Keyhole, whose team now included CIA personnel. Google would soon turn Keyhole into the basis for Google Earth. Only a year after the purchase, the director responsible for initially investing in Keyhole at the CIA investing firm In-Q-Tel moved to take a position at Google. During this period, Google would win contracts for different search applications for the NSA and CIA. It's understandable that Google has a relationship with the CIA and many other government agencies. In fact, most tech giants do. At the start of this year, with a looming US election, some of the biggest names such as Microsoft, Facebook, Twitter, and Google have had meetings with the FBI, Homeland Security, and the Office of the Director of National Security. Little is known about these meetings, apart from the theme of how tech giants can ensure security for the 2020 elections. Google, for example, has implemented an advanced protection program. This program offers Google's highest protection level to high-risk targets such as journalists, activists, politicians, and business leaders. It effectively makes these accounts less susceptible to hacking risks such as phishing and malware attacks. But perhaps the greatest demonstration of the company's integration into the intelligence community is Google Federal. Google Federal was launched in 2006, and its purpose is to serve federal contracts. At a certain point, this branch of Google had so many former NSA staff that they became known as the NSA West. At its very launch, Google Federal went on a hiring spree, hiring managers and salespeople from the Army, Air Force, CIA, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin. It added to its lobbying prowess by assembling a team of Democratic and Republican operatives. The strength of the relationship between Google and the intelligence community was graphically highlighted in 2010. At this time, Google came under attack from what was believed to be Chinese government hackers. The NSA came to Google's aid. The two organizations struck up a deal, an exchange of information. According to journalists, quote, Google agreed to provide information about traffic on its networks in exchange for the intelligence from the NSA about what it knew of foreign hackers. Google Jigsaw is a division dedicated to combating global threats such as extremism, censorship, and disinformation, but this division has had its missteps. In 2012, as the Syrian civil war was escalating, the intelligence community was pushing for a change of government. In 2016, leaked emails revealed that Google's Jigsaw department brainstormed ways that it could push Bashar al-Assad from power. Among these ideas was a tool that visually mapped and tracked officials who broke allegiance to Assad's government. Jared Cohen, head of Google Jigsaw, planned to show this data on TV networks such as Al Jazeera within Syria. The purpose of this was to serve as propaganda to give confidence to the opposition of Assad. This opposition was, of course, the side that the intelligence community wanted to win. According to Fred Burton, a former intelligence agent at the security branch of the State Department, quote, Google is getting White House and State Department support and air cover. In reality, they are doing things the CIA cannot do. More recently, Google created a tool to track if users are at high risk of radicalization based upon their internet usage. The tool redirects them to government websites focused on persuading them off their ideas. It seems now, more than ever, Google and other tech giants are blurring the line between corporate and government intelligence. Google's entry into the market makes financial sense. By 2019, the federal government was spending $90 billion a year on information technology. It's a huge market, and Google seems to want to maintain a strong presence. The world in which the CIA and the intelligence community operates is a distant cry from reality and what most people are aware of. Likely, we will never know the full extent of their operations or the events that the CIA had an impact on. From helping overthrow governments to spying on the public, many controversies follow this organization. We didn't even touch on drug trafficking operations during wartime in Asia, Watergate, or the recruitment of former Nazis. That being said, It could be argued that there are just as many less sensationalized activities that have kept peace in the world that the public would never be aware of. Such is the nature of this organization's work. Secretive, enigmatic. As technology and the freedom of information give power to the masses, there is now a rising risk of an adverse technocracy. What hand will tech giants play in this future? And what does this mean for the world and society if private companies begin running intelligence and intervention programs on the public? Many years ago, when I was younger, I used to be fond of Google, but now I look at them differently.
What could the random murder of a 6-year-old child snatched from her bed in her own home possibly have to do with national security? A May 2016 article written by Timothy Charles Holmseth asks this question, which I believe cracks open the entire case, which has had the American public fascinated, horrified, and perplexed since the 1990s. Holmseth makes the connection to Kathy O'Brien, who claims to have information on the JonBenet Ramsey case. Kathy's claims seem to be a skeleton key that opened many doors for me in researching this particular matter. Kathy O'Brien is a recovered and vocal survivor of the CIA's MKUltra Project Monarch mind control operation. Born in Michigan in 1957, Kathy was born into a family of generational pedophilia. She was sexually abused by her father from infancy. Kathy's father, Earl O'Brien, had a 6th grade education and earned his money as a worm digger. He supplemented his meager income through sales of pornography, images of Kathy and her siblings being abused. He was selling these images through the U.S. mail until one day he was caught by the U.S. government. Lucky for Earl, though, a local politician approached him with a proposition.
This one particular politician that was involved in that was just a local politician at that time. And he approached my father and told him he could receive immunity from prosecution if he would agree to sell me into MKUltra mind control. Because any child who had been and used in child so horrifically prior to age 5 would be suffering from the dissociative identity disorder that made me a target for mind control.
Trauma-based mind control programs such as MKUltra and Project Monarch were revealed to the public via declassified documents in the 70s and again in the 90s, with several victims giving testimony before Congress. The basis of these programs is the routine infliction of severe trauma upon a child in order to force their mind into a dissociative state, allowing them to be controlled without awareness. Up until the age of 7, children live mostly in a hypnotic state of mind, when their sense of reality is being written, which explains why they target children, specifically those that come from abusive households. Bryce Taylor and Kathy O'Brien have each described in their books how they were regularly brought to Disneyland and Disney World, where they would be tortured and raped while being programmed with Disney stories, as well as Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. This has been verified in CIA documents. O'Brien says she was tortured in a room beneath Disney World, which we know was designed by agents of the CIA, who were running this program at that time. Victims of these programs were sold into them by their abusive parents, a model we see today with parents pimping their children out to the entertainment industry.
Even today, we have reason to believe that MKUltra lives on in an even more heinous form as the Monarch Project. And the difference between the Monarch Project and the MKUltra Project is that it fuses child abuse with Satanism. And what happens is that under the auspices of the government, children are not only tortured and drugged and electrocuted and having all sorts of horrible things done to them, but they are also hypnotized and have scientifically inserted demons placed within their altered parts, as they are called in what used to be called multiple personality disorder. It's now called dissociative identity disorder. And by doing that, they create various kinds of slaves, super spies, super sex slaves, super soldiers. And this is a very dismaying part of what the government is doing, but this is one of the many black projects that it is unknown to most, probably 99% of the American people.
As soon as my father sold me into the project, he was flown to Boston, Massachusetts, where the Catholic faction, the Jesuit faction of Project Monarch, was being run by Cardinal Law. My father was trained by Cardinal Law on how to raise me in the project. This included human trafficking. It wasn't called human trafficking back then. It was just being prostituted out to all the local politicians, the policemen, all the pedophile priests that were involved in my area, and those who were part of my grandfather's Blue Masonic Lodge. The Blue Masonic Lodge is where all the politicians came together and were actively part of making the plans for MK Ultra mind control.
O'Brien observes the evidence of the JonBenet Ramsey murder as the result of a torture session involving controlled asphyxiation, electric shock, and sexual assault during a mind control programming session. Whether little JonBenet was killed by asphyxiation or that blow to the head sort of depends who you ask. Dr. Cyril Wecht is a renowned forensic pathologist, and he points to the fact that JonBenet's head injury only produced 7 cc, or about a teaspoon and a half of blood. As such, he believes that that injury was inflicted after JonBenet was already deceased as a result of ligature strangulation from that cord around the neck. He believes the perpetrator inflicted this injury to cover up the actual cause of death, which is asphyxiation.
What do you think? If any one of us got cracked on the head like that, do you think there might be more than a teaspoon and a half of blood? She was already dead. That blow was inflicted to make it appear that she had been assaulted by this brutal killer. She was already dead from the rope around the neck that produced cardiac arrest.
Both examining physicians also agreed that there were signs of sexual abuse, both from the night of her death and prior chronic sexual abuse. It is not in dispute that the child, both on the night of her death and leading up to it, was being sexually abused. That's an important factor.
Then there's the stun gun question. Sources say injuries on the little girl may have come from a stun gun.
Unless some other evidence is presented to me, the most likely explanation for those injuries is that they were caused by a stun gun.
The Ramseys deny owning one. But New Yorker magazine says police found a stun gun instructional video in the Ramsey house.
So this is a confirmed fact that a stun gun instructional video was found in the Ramsey household. According to Kathy O'Brien, this was a military instructional video called How to Create a Mind-Controlled Slave Using a Stun Gun. She states that she is the victim in the video, and it was filmed in Huntsville, Alabama by U.S. Army Ranger Colonel Michael Aquino, who is a confirmed Satanist and a founder of the Temple of Set.
Intelligence agencies have infiltrated and created some satanic groups. With the resurgence of these groups, beginning in 1966, particularly with the birth of the Church of Satan, founded by Anton LaVey. LaVey's most famous associate is the National Security Agency General Michael Aquino. At the time of his membership in LaVey's group, Aquino was an Army specialist in intelligence and psychological warfare. In 1973, he became the executive officer of the 306th Psychological Operations Battalion, contemporary with his founding of the Church of Set. General Michael Aquino wrote, "From PSYOP to Mind War, the Psychology of Victory." Aquino's thesis stated that enemy populations could be subdued by inflicting a state of psychological terror and feelings of imminent destruction. He discusses the use of psychotronic weapons or electromagnetic weapons that influence the mind.
Kathy, along with other survivors such as Bryce Taylor and Paul Bonacci, have identified Colonel Michael Aquino as one of her sadistic MKUltra programmers. O'Brien maintains that her programmer displayed satanic power in the form of high-voltage stun guns he used on her regularly. According to Kathy, Aquino's mind control programming was administered with high-tech efficiency, quickly erasing her previous handler's influence. She underwent programming torture sessions with Aquino on other military posts and a NASA flight center all in the state of Alabama. Aquino programmed Kathy according to her owner's specification, including sadistic sex, covert CIA drug muling, blackmail, and prostitution operations. While Kathy was an MKUltra slave, she gave birth to her daughter in 1980. Aquino also began utilizing all the latest mind control modalities on Kathy's daughter by age 2, with sexual assault and stun gun torture, shattering her mind prior to her base personality forming. To this day, both mother and daughter carry the physical and emotional scars of Aquino's work.
Aquino and his fellow intelligence operatives within the Temple of Set demonstrate a clear link between occultism, which means hidden knowledge, and mind war. Isn't that the very essence of magic, to manipulate the mind?
To me, this is where the darkness comes from. This is the CIA's operations, Bluebird, Artichoke, MKUltra. These were cynical manipulations of human consciousness, disregarding any ethical or moral considerations.
Now, when it comes to this stun gun instructional video found in the Ramseys' home, Kathy states that high-profile attorney Alan Dershowitz referred to this military video found in the Ramsey home that it was censored under national security. And given the information I've shared with you thus far, you can start to see why that would be censored, as being part of a highly classified government operation. The Ramseys have addressed this video that was found in their house in their book, Death of Innocence, on page 195, writing, quote, "Later in July, I had learned that stun guns can be bought at spy shops. I remembered that Patsy and I had attended a Super Bowl game in Miami in 1994 as guests of Sun Microsystems. On Saturday morning, we had gone out for a walk in the small village of Coral Gables with no other intention than doing a little window shopping, and happened to pass by a spy shop that sold goods for security and monitoring. Several times in the past, I had wondered if a competitor might tap our telephones at the office and get sensitive information that could be used against us in business. Not that our competitors would do that, but I don't know that they wouldn't either. This particular shop in Coral Gables carried hidden cameras, bugging equipment, security devices, and everything under the sun that a person concerned with security might want. I learned that it was not easy to detect a phone tap on a complex phone system, such as the one we had at Access. I also got a sales pitch on some other things that they sold. As we left, the clerk gave me a videotape catalog to take home. When I returned to Boulder, I threw it in a drawer and completely forgot about the tape. I surmised that the police went through everything in our house. They found the video catalog, which apparently turned out to have an advertisement for, you got it, stun guns. Not too long after, the police reported to the media that they had found a stun gun, quote, instructional video, end quote, in the Ramsey house. So on the one hand, they were supporting the stun gun theory, but on the other hand, they were now indirectly saying that I had used this weapon on my daughter. Of course, for a period of time, the video created a significant uproar and cast further suspicion on me. Later, we got a copy of the video catalog from the store in Coral Gables and found it was recorded in Spanish. Not only had I never reviewed the tape, but if I had, I wouldn't have understood it. According to the Ramseys, this video was really just a catalog that they had picked up at a spy shop that happened to have an advertisement for stun guns in it. Nothing to see here, folks. Besides, what am I alleging here? That John and Patsy Ramsey were CIA assets participating in this behavioral mind control program? It seems a little far-fetched, don't you think? And yes, it is far-fetched, but nothing about this case is straightforward or typical. And is it me, or did something always feel a little bit off about these two?
Patsy was once a beauty queen and had been crowned Miss West Virginia. John was a Navy pilot and a divorced father of 3 children when he and Patsy met. Home had been Atlanta, Georgia, where John Bonet was born in 1990. The family moved to Boulder the next year to expand John's software company. The business grew quickly. The Ramseys owned a private plane and bought this 7,000-square-foot house in town. John's company, Access Graphics, had cleared $1 billion in profit that year.
What we saw in still photographs and in videos was a child dressed like an adult, very suggestive in many of these pictures, lipstick, mascara, moving around on the stage on these beauty pageants. To many people, this looks perverted. Therefore, there's got to be something wrong here.
There is something wrong here if someone thinks that looks perverted. Jean Monnet was an entertainer. She would entertain at the drop of a hat. Little girls dress up and play dress up.
You yourself had entered beauty contests.
Yes.
I'm a junior at West Virginia University.
So this was, what, fun for you both
It
to
was
have to
the
do
most
this?
wonderful time of my life. It's not unlike a father who enjoyed playing baseball as a child. He wants to impart that same love of the game with his son or daughter. There's just absolutely nothing wrong with it.
They called Jean Benet a 6-year-old Lolita, a pun-sized sex kitten.
The people that look at these things and see something perverted, that didn't come from Jean Benet. That's coming from the viewer, not the child.
There are quite a few indicators that Patsy Ramsey may have been born into a Luciferian/Masonic family. Similar to Kathy O'Brien, I have to wonder if she was also used for monarch programming.
You say neither, and I say neither.
Patsy always liked to be in the limelight, and she was in the pageant system.
Let's call the whole thing off.
Patsy was born just 1 year before Kathy in December of 1956. As Kathy describes in her book Transformation of America, it's quite common for MK Ultra handlers to cross-program between mother and daughter, and that seems to be somewhat evident between Patsy and Jean Benet. Also, just a side note, she died on June 24th, 2006, reportedly of ovarian cancer, and I just have to point out that this date, when added up, adds up to 666, so do it that way you will. There's a good deal of Masonic symbolism in Jean Benet's pageant outfits, as well as in their home, and John is seen a time or two on TV throwing this Masonic square and compass symbolism. Now here's where things get interesting. Kathy alleges that as Miss West Virginia, Patsy had ties to Robert C. Byrd, who was the senator for West Virginia for a very long time, and who also happened to be Kathy's MK Ultra owner. She also states that John Ramsey had connections to her father. So Kathy grew up in Muskegon, Michigan, which is interesting because the Ramseys had a house in Charlevoix. There is apparently a manifest that documents John Ramsey and Kathy's father, Earl O'Brien, on the same ferry ride from Traverse City, Michigan to Beaver Island, which is just off the coast of Charlevoix, where the Ramseys have a vacation home. According to intelligence insider Mark Phillips, Beaver Island is an identified mind control training center associated with the Jesuits. It's interesting to note that after selling Kathy into the Project Monarch program, her father Earl apparently became a multi-millionaire through government contracts. John Ramsey's attorneys also provide some interesting connections worth looking at. Haddon Morgan Foreman is a Denver-based law office known for representing high-profile elites such as Ghislaine Maxwell, Harvey Weinstein, and Hunter S. Thompson. Here is John's attorney Hal Haddon photographed with his apparently good friend Bill Clinton, who was president at the time this all went down, by the way, and who we now know apparently likes them young according to newly released Epstein files. The firm is also said to have business ties to Alex Hunter, the Boulder County DA who has been accused many times of giving the Ramseys special treatment. Here's a graphic I found online that does a good job of showing just how well connected the Ramseys attorneys were with the Boulder DA office, as well as several other prominent members of society. It's all too interesting that John Ramsey and Ghislaine Maxwell shared an attorney, considering this infamous photograph of John Bonet and what appears to be Ghislaine Maxwell in the background. I mean, I'm no expert, but I believe this to be like a 99% match. Look at the shape of the eyes and the point of the nose, the width and the arch of the eyebrows, the skin tone, the hairline, even the dimples seem to all line up pretty perfectly. You can really tell in this one with the eyes, the eyebrow, the point of the nose, and even the cheekbones are like an identical match.
This is John Bonet. She's 4, Burke 7, and we'd like to welcome you to our home and wish you a very Merry Christmas.
We're going to solve this case, but we're going to do it our way.
As Boulder's district attorney for 26 years, running the last 7 terms unopposed, Alex Hunter is certainly popular. Veteran reporter Juliet Whitman outlined a sampling of cases not filed or undercharged.
I think there's real fear and incompetence and laziness.
Attorney Claudia Bailiff ran Boulder's Crisis Center for 5 years. She says she was so surprised at the plea bargains for child. In 1990, she prepared this formal study of Hunter's record.
The most staggering statistic we came up with was of 60 individuals who were convicted of sexually abusing children or only 1 went to prison. And we were absolutely stunned by that.
Bailiff resigned in frustration. The new team at the Crisis Center says Hunter's record has improved.
You know, Alex Hunter should have been a criminal defense attorney or a public defender, not a district attorney.
In the late 1990s, a grand jury was convened to look into the unsolved murder of John Bonet Ramsey. The grand jury indicted both John and Patsy Ramsey, issuing a true bill for child abuse resulting in death and accessory to first-degree murder. However, Alex Hunter, the DA, chose to misrepresent the findings of the grand jury and declined to move forward with the indictment. This was all uncovered in 2013 due to litigation by investigative reporters, which caused the grand jury records to be unsealed, revealing the nature of the charges brought against the Ramsey parents. According to the grand jury, probable cause existed that Patsy and John unlawfully, knowingly, recklessly, and feloniously permitted their child to be unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of John Bonet Ramsey, a child under the age of 16. Moreover, the grand jury alleged that John and Patsy did knowingly render assistance to a person with intent to hinder, delay, and prevent the discovery, detention, apprehension, prosecution, conviction, and punishment of such a person for the commission of a crime, knowing that person being assisted has committed and was suspected of the crime of first-degree murder and child resulting in death. I should note that in Colorado, first-degree murder doesn't necessarily require premeditation. There are several circumstances that can fall under first-degree murder, such as conduct which shows extreme indifference to the value of human life and creates a grave risk of death to a person.
We were indicted for, which was nonsense, was child abuse resulting in death. And we were told, well, you didn't protect your child. And that's true. I mean, I regret that I didn't set the burglar alarm or check the windows.
What about accessory? They also voted to indict on accessory.
Really? I didn't know that. I don't know even what that means, frankly.
Meaning that you and Patsy helped someone else.
Really? Well, that's absurd. It's just absurd.
That you and Patsy helped someone else. Someone else.
Oh, really? Well, that's absurd. It's just absurd.
The language in the indictments can tell us a thing or two about what the grand jury believed the parents' role in the crime was. For example, permit your child to be placed in a situation that posed great risk of harm. The word permit to me suggests both knowledge and acceptance of the fact that their daughter was being both sexually and tortured by way of electric shock and controlled asphyxiation, according to the evidence. Also, the allegation of knowingly aiding an individual guilty of a crime of first-degree murder or child resulting in death suggests that there is an unindicted third party who is responsible for the actual murder, but that the Ramseys helped cover it up, explaining some of the strange evidence, such as the ransom note in Patsy's handwriting. A basic review of the physical evidence, circumstantial evidence and connections, even symbolism, and finally the language in the indictments really does support the original theory provided to us by Kathy O'Brien, that the murder of JonBenet Ramsey was most likely a mind control torture session gone wrong. I think it's reasonable to deduce that her possible programmer is somebody who's high up in either the military or intelligence. After likely taking the controlled asphyxiation aspect of the torture too far, and JonBenet passed away via cardiac arrest, JonBenet's murderer and the Ramsey parents panicked and did everything they could to stage this scene, which is why it appears so incoherent and sloppy, to say the least. I suspect that the Ramseys were being paid for the essential sexual exploitation of their daughter, as well as her participation possibly in the Monarch program. I speculate that this is how John's business, which is a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin, a defense contracting company, became so successful so quickly, and how they accumulated millions of dollars, a private jet, a 7,000 square foot mansion. It all just kind of really adds up. I think the public struggled to put these pieces together for so long because, well, first of all, this concept of trauma-based mind control is unfamiliar to most. Whether by design or cruel irony, it seems that this case infiltrated and effectively traumatized the psyche of the population on a global scale. Every insidious detail evokes terror, sadness, and disgust. The media outrageously, explicitly, and unrelentlessly pushed this case in our faces. In fact, clips of JonBenet's pageants were some of the first ever viral videos. For many, seeing a 6-year-old in sexualized outfits and a full face of makeup was unnatural, revolting, and especially disturbing considering the brutal way she was murdered.
Now, MKUltra was a very complex program that dealt with human experiments and mind manipulation.
As this 1952 CIA memo says, the aim is controlling an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will, and even against such fundamental laws of nature as self-preservation.
In the church committee, MKUltra came out as an actual program of mind control using mental, physical, and sexual abuse and psychotropic drugs.
JonBenet symbolized innocence and light, exploited and smothered out by psychopathic perversion. Her case represents a long list of deceitful adults who repeatedly failed her in life and death. People who used money and connections to evade justice and gaslight the public. I believe the information presented in this video, while not the whole story, is a good starting point to uncovering the truth about JonBenet Ramsey's death and the circumstances leading up to it. I think it also explains why nobody was ever charged and critical questions were never asked. Perhaps the perpetrators, as well as the mainstream media, understood that trauma is the key to mind control, and that a psychologically traumatized population is much easier to control. So with that, I'll leave you the wise words of Kathy O'Brien. The following is from Access Denied for Reasons of National Security, written by Kathy and her partner Mark Phillips and published in 2004. Recently, when I saw my daughter Kelly, she cried when she said, quote, "The only difference between JonBenet and me is that she can't be abused anymore," end quote. JonBenet's murder has prompted rumors of mind control and caused people to think to ask questions that the media won't answer. People are learning that the media is as controlled as JonBenet appeared to be. That precious child did not die in vain. Her memory lives on in all of us. How many more have to die before people in this country wake up and stop pedophilia, mind control, and new world orders? Knowledge is our only defense against mind control. Please help us spread the word for Kelly's sake, JonBenet's sake, and for the sake of humanity's future.
The following video deals with mature subject matter which may not be suitable for younger children. Viewer discretion is advised.
Last week, on July 4th, 2023, the action film Sound of Freedom premiered worldwide under the distribution of Angel Studios after spending 6 years on the back burners of 20th Century Fox and Disney. This movie is based on the career of Tim Ballard, a former special agent for America's Department of Homeland Security, who has spent a decade rescuing children from the dark underworld of the sex trafficking industry through his non-profit organization, Operation Underground Railroad. Ballard is played by American actor Jim Caviezel, star of the films The Thin Red Line, The Count of Monte Cristo, and The Passion of the Christ, who has attracted media attention in recent years for his statements that trafficked children are sometimes tortured so that adrenochrome might be extracted from their bodies. Adrenochrome being a natural chemical produced by the oxidation of the hormone epinephrine or adrenaline. Caviezel, who claims to have gleaned this information from the anti-trafficking agency consulted while working on The Sound of Freedom, first mentioned what he called the adrenochroming of children in 2021, while remotely promoting the film at a health freedom conference in the city of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. He elaborated on this alleged practice more recently in an interview with former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, describing adrenochrome as an elite drug that they've used for many years. It's 10 times more potent than heroin, and it has some mystical qualities as far as making you look younger. Ambrosia is the street term, well, the elite term. Ballard himself touched on the underground adrenochrome industry in a recent viral interview with Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson. "They're taking children's blood and devouring it," Ballard said, referring to human trafficking clients in West Africa. "It's very real, this witch doctory. They take these children, they take their organs, they take their blood, they drink it." The notion that fresh, naturally derived human adrenochrome is a potent narcotic in high demand on the black market, particularly among certain elitist circles, far predates Ballard and Caviezel's recent statements, having circulated throughout the shadowy corners of the internet for decades. Adrenochrome, as mentioned, is a derivative of the fight-or-flight hormone adrenaline, normally produced in the adrenal glands above the kidneys in response to perceived danger. When subjected to extreme stress, the body floods the bloodstream with adrenaline, causing an increase in heart and respiratory rate, and providing muscles with the energy they need to contract quickly and powerfully. When subjected to extreme anxiety, the body suffers what biologists call oxidative stress, during which the body produces negatively charged oxidants like superoxide. During physical torture, the body produces an excess of both adrenaline and oxidants, which interact with each other to form the chemical compound adrenochrome. Predictably, various mainstream media outlets have dismissed the notion of an underground adrenochrome industry as a baseless, right-wing fantasy. In his July 31st, 2020 article for the website Wired.com, for example, Harvard ethnographer Brian Friedberg characterized the concept of adrenochrome harvesting as a modern incarnation of a centuries-old anti-Semitic myth. This supposed urban fairy tale, other writers have proposed, has its roots in journalist Hunter S. Thompson's 1971 novel, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Thompson's book is based on the author's own trips to Sin City with Hispanic attorney Oscar Zeta Acosta. About halfway through the novel, Acosta's character hands Thompson's character a little brown bottle of adrenochrome, which he claims to have obtained from a Satanist accused of child molestation. "He offered me human blood," he said of the dealer. said it would make me higher than I'd ever been in my life. I thought he was kidding, so I told him I'd just as soon have an ounce or so of pure adrenochrome. Of the substance itself, he said, that stuff makes pure mescaline seem like ginger beer. You'll go completely crazy if you take too much. There's only one source for this stuff, the adrenal glands from a living human body. It's no good if you get it out of a corpse. In reality, skeptics argue, adrenochrome is a relatively mundane and not very exciting chemical compound, with little value as a narcotic, which can be easily and inexpensively synthesized in a lab. Some have even made the erroneous claim that it cannot be found in human blood, or that it doesn't exist at all. While synthetic crystalline adrenochrome can indeed be cheaply produced, as it has been for laboratory purposes since 1958, the idea that the substance in its fresh, natural form is not an extremely potent hallucinogen flies in the face of human experiments conducted in the 1950s in an unassuming corner of the Canadian province of Saskatchewan, and in the longevity of a brutal native custom once practiced by the First Nations of the Great Lakes. In this piece, we will explore Canada's shocking role in the dark history of adrenochrome consumption. Before we delve into the fascinating story of Drs. Hoffer, Osmond, and Smithies, Saskatchewan-based pioneers in the medical application of psychoactive drugs, who theorize that schizophrenia is caused by the inability to metabolize adrenochrome in the brain, who personally explored the psychedelic potential of adrenochrome through self-experimentation, let us first take a look at a historic phenomenon which may constitute the first recorded instances of adrenochrome consumption in Canada. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, missionaries, explorers, soldiers, and fur traders who plied their trade in eastern Canada described a grisly, martial ritual practiced by certain First Nations warriors of what is now Ontario and Quebec. In the aftermath of a victorious battle, or at the fatal conclusion of the ritual torture of an enemy prisoner, native braves would eat the flesh and drink the blood of their fallen enemies, believing that such ingestion allowed them to absorb the power of the slain. This horrific custom was practiced by the Iroquois, a confederacy of 5 nations native to the forests of upstate New York, whose ruthless warriors, allied with the Dutch and English settlers of what is now the northeastern United States, were the terror of 17th century New France. The Iroquois' proclivity for consuming the corpses of their enemies is alluded to several times in the Jesuit relations, reports made by French Jesuit missionaries to their superiors, describing their attempts to convert the natives of New France to Christianity. For example, in a 1632 relation, Jesuit father Paul Lejeune, who lived among the Montagnais of Quebec at the time, described how the Iroquois made their prisoners of war suffer all that cruelty as the devil can suggest. At last, as a final horror, they eat and devour them almost raw. In 1637, Lejeune detailed the torture, execution, and cannibalism of an Iroquois prisoner captured by the Huron, another Algonquian people native to the Great Lakes. After tying him to a tree, the Huron captors burned their prisoner with torches and red-hot tomahawks until his entire body was scorched, going so far as to melt his eyes and thrust burning brands down his throat. When the prisoner became too exhausted to recoil from their implements, the captors dismembered him alive and feasted on his corpse. Perhaps the most famous record of Iroquois torture and cannibalism is the second-hand account of the martyrdom of Father Jean de Brebeuf, Canada's patron saint, which appears in the 1649 issue of the Jesuit Relations. Jean de Brebeuf was a French Jesuit missionary who ministered to the spiritual needs of the Huron Indians between Lakes Ontario and Huron. In 1647, the Hurons' hereditary enemies, the Mohawk and Seneca of the Iroquois Confederacy, launched what would become a massive 9-year offensive against France's native allies in the Great Lakes. On March 16, 1649, Brebeuf and his assistant, Father Gabriel Lallemand, were caught in the crossfire of this so-called Beaver War, when the Iroquois captured the village in which they had established their mission and carried them off to Georgian Bay. On the shores of that great lake, as historian René Latourelle put it, they suffered one of the most atrocious martyrdoms in the annals of Christianity. Brebeuf's fate was recorded by his fellow Jesuit, Christophe Regnault, who learned the details of his last moments from some wounded Huron warriors who escaped their Iroquois captors and sought refuge in his cabin. The Huron fugitives described how the Iroquois had stripped the priest naked and tied him to a post before torturing him. First, they tore out his fingernails. Next, they beat every inch of his body with clubs. One member of Brebeuf's old Huron congregation, who had been captured by the Iroquois in an earlier raid and absorbed into the tribe, poured a kettle of boiling water on the Jesuit's head in mockery of the sacrament of baptism. The Iroquois then adorned Brebeuf with a necklace consisting of red-hot tomahawk heads strung together, and with a bark belt saturated with resin, which they set on fire. During all these torments, Regnault's informants told him, Father de Brebeuf endured like a rock, insensible to fire and flames, which astonished all the bloodthirsty wretches who tormented him. His zeal was so great that he preached continually to these infidels to try to convert them. His executioners were enraged against him for constantly speaking to them of God and of their conversion. To prevent him from speaking more, they cut off his tongue, and both his upper and lower lips. After that, they set themselves to strip the flesh from his legs, thighs, and arms to the very bone, and then put it to roast before his eyes in order to eat it. Those butchers, seeing that the good father began to grow weak, made him sit down on the ground, and one of them, taking a knife, cut off the skin covering his skull. Another one of those barbarians, seeing that the good father would soon die, made an opening in the upper part of his chest and tore out his heart, which he roasted and ate. Others came to drink his blood, still warm, which they drank with both hands, saying that Father de Brebeuf had been very courageous to endure as much pain as they had given him, and that, by drinking his blood, they would become courageous like him. The Iroquois offensive in which Jean de Brebeuf lost his life resulted in the displacement of the Huron, as well as the virtual destruction of the Neutral, Petun, and Erie nations, all allies of the French. After a ferocious French counterattack throughout the first half of the 1660s, the Iroquois entered into a shaky truce with the settlers of New France and established villages throughout the territories of their vanquished native enemies. In 1669, 20 years after the martyrdom of Jean de Brebeuf, two parties of French explorers set out together in search of the Ohio River. One of the groups was captained by René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle, an adventurer who would later establish the French colony of Louisiana, who at the time hoped that the Ohio River might constitute the legendary Northwest Passage. The other party was a company of Sulpician missionaries, led by François Delier de Casson, a French cavalry officer turned priest, who hoped to convert the natives of the Ohio River to the Catholic faith. The joint company embarked at La Salle's seigneury of Lachine, on the island of Montreal, and traveled by canoe up the St. Lawrence River and along the southern shores of Lake Ontario. At what is probably Irondequoit Bay, they came upon a Seneca Iroquois village, whose inhabitants invited them to stay the night. Unfortunately for the Frenchmen, the evening's entertainment consisted of the ritual torture and execution of a prisoner of war from the West, a well-built warrior in his late teens or early 20s. Casson's traveling companion and fellow Sulpician missionary, René de Brehon de Galinée, described the atrocity in his journal, Exploration of the Great Lakes, 1669 to 1670. For 6 hours, the Iroquois seared the prisoner from head to toe with a red-hot musket barrel, beginning with the soles of his feet. When he was sufficiently roasted, they forced him to run a gauntlet through the village, prodding him with lit torches and showering him with hot coals all the while. At length, Galinée wrote, after 2 hours of this barbarous diversion, they knocked him down with a stone, and throwing themselves upon him, cut his body in pieces. One carried off his head, another an arm, a third some other member, which they put in a pot for the feast. Many offered some to the Frenchmen, telling them there was nothing in the world better to eat, but no one desired to try the experiment. There are other tales of Iroquois torture and cannibalism, which appear in the letters and memoirs of the inhabitants of New France. In 1680, for example, while exploring the Mississippi River, La Salle and his companions came across the remains of hundreds of Illinois women and children, whom Iroquois warriors had tortured to death in a field. Most of the victims had been mutilated and partially eaten. In the summer of 1689, after hostilities resumed between the Iroquois and the French, Mohawk warriors attacked the French settlement of Lachine, which had developed around La Salle's old seigneury, and massacred its inhabitants. The warriors reputedly roasted and ate the settlement's children, including, according to some reports, a handful of preborn infants, whom they cut out of their mothers' wombs. Since there are no 17th century Iroquois warriors around today, who might justify their people's practice of torturing and cannibalizing their enemies. We can only speculate as to the reason for this fiendish cultural quirk. Perhaps their barbaric rituals were simply expressions of supreme victory over their vanquished foes, the acts of torture and cannibalism being the most complete forms of control one warrior can exert over another. Perhaps, as historian George Franklin Feldman suggested in his 2008 book, Cannibalism, Headhunting, and Human Sacrifice in North America, A Forgotten History, citing a passage from one of Lejeune's relations, the Iroquois believed they were commanded to torture and eat their enemies by the deity they worshipped, the implacable sun god. Or perhaps, as Regnault's pitiable description of Brebeuf's martyrdom seems to imply, the Iroquois hoped to acquire their enemies' bravery through the consumption of their tortured flesh and blood, a notion that could only have been bolstered by the powerful psychological effects of adrenochrome, which Iroquois torturer executioners would surely have ingested in copious quantities. The Iroquois and Huron were not the only First Nations to traditionally torture and eat their prisoners. In the forests north of Iroquoian territory, and around the upper Great Lakes to the west, lay the traditional homeland of various Algonquian or Anishinaabe nations, like the Ojibwe and Ottawa. Although these people generally abhorred the idea of cannibalism as a means of survival during the cold winter months and in times of famine, associating such anthropophagy with an evil spirit called the Wendigo, some of them were not averse to drinking the lifeblood and feasting on the flesh of enemy warriors defeated in battle. One early report of martial cannibalism among the Ojibwe appears in the French-language book Memoir on the Manners, Customs, and Religion of the Savages of North America, written by French explorer and fur trader Nicolas Perrault, sometime in the late 17th or early 18th century. Perrault described how, in 1662, about 100 Iroquois warriors entered Ojibwe country at Sault Ste. Marie, between Lakes Huron and Superior, to look for a village to eat, as they have always taken pleasure in drinking the blood and eating the flesh of all the different tribes. Before launching their planned assault, these invaders were perceived by Ojibwe scouts, who brought word of their presence back to their band. The Ojibwe hastily assembled their own war party and ambushed the unsuspecting Iroquois at daybreak, at a place known today as Iroquois Point. The skirmish that ensued was a complete victory for the Ojibwe, who slew every last one of their southern foes with arrows and war clubs. The would-be cannibals met the same fate they had planned to deal to the natives of Lake Superior. The Iroquois who had been sent out as scouts, Perrault wrote, returned to their camp a few days after this defeat, expecting to join their people there. But when they found only headless corpses on the ground, and the bones of those whose flesh had been eaten, they made diligent haste to carry back to their own country this dismal news. Other documented cases of Anishinaabe cannibalism occurred during the 7 Years' War, a global conflict fought between France and Britain and their respective allies from 1756 to 1763, and in a smaller succeeding conflict known as Pontiac's Rebellion. We will explore one of the better written accounts to come out of the second conflict. The 7 Years' War resulted in British control over nearly all of eastern continental North America, from as far north as Hudson's Bay to as far south as New Orleans. In the aftermath of this World War, British soldiers began to garrison themselves in the old French fur trading forts established throughout the Great Lakes. They were followed by independent British and colonial American fur traders, called peddlers, who hoped to open up trading relationships with the native allies of the defeated French. Among the first of these peddlers was a New Jersey-born adventurer, known today as Alexander Henry the Elder, who recorded his Canadian escapades in his 1809 memoir. The Anishinaabe had no great love for the British, whom they had actively fought against during the late war. In comparison with their erstwhile French trading partners, who lavished gifts upon them at the commencement of trading sessions, and regularly married their sisters and daughters, the British seemed cool and condescending. On the orders of their general Geoffrey Amherst, who feared an Indian uprising, they also sold the natives less gunpowder and lead than they had grown accustomed to using. Unwilling to tolerate the subtle insults of these haughty red-coated conquerors, a handful of Anishinaabe nations rallied around an Ottawa war chief named Pontiac and attempted to violently drive the British out of their territory, sparking a 3-year war known as Pontiac's Rebellion. On June 4, 1763, at the outbreak of this conflict, Alexander Henry the Elder was trading at Fort Michilimackinac, at the northern tip of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where a company of British soldiers had just taken up residence. Unbeknownst to the British, a local Ojibwe band had secretly decided to participate in Pontiac's rebellion, and concocted a brilliant plan to take the fort by surprise. In honor of King George III's birthday, the Ojibwe proposed to play a game of lacrosse with a visiting band of Sauk Indians just outside the fort, and invited the soldiers to watch. In the midst of the game, an Ojibwe player lobbed the lacrosse ball over the fort's walls, prompting the entire team to stampede through the fort's open gate. As they entered the complex, the players seized knives and tomahawks from the Ojibwe women who had inconspicuously stationed themselves at the gate, concealing the weapons beneath wool blankets, and proceeded to slaughter the unsuspecting Englishmen therein. Henry was writing a letter in his cabin when a cacophony of Indian war cries erupted outside, marking the commencement of the attack. "Going instantly to my window," he wrote, "I saw a crowd of Indians within the fort, furiously cutting down and scalping every Englishman they found." Henry seized a flintlock shotgun and contemplated stepping outside to help his fellow countrymen, but quickly realized that to do so would be suicidal. Observing that the Ojibwe were not harming any of the French-Canadian residents of the fort, Henry sought refuge in the cabin of one of his Gallic neighbors and found a hiding place in the attic. Through a crack in the wall, he watched the Ojibwe warriors go about their grisly work. "The dead were scalped and mangled," he wrote. "The dying were writhing and shrieking under the unsatiated knife and tomahawk, and from the bodies of some, ripped open, the butchers were drinking the blood, scooped up in the hollow of joined hands, and quaffed amid shouts of rage and victory." The day after the massacre, the owners of the cabin in which Henry had taken refuge handed him over to the Ojibwe. Instead of slaughtering him in cold blood, as some of the more hot-headed warriors expressed a desire to do, the Ojibwe chiefs shackled Henry with a handful of prisoners who had been spared the butchery of the previous day. Several days later, Henry was freed by an Ojibwe sub-chief, whom he had befriended prior to the massacre. This intervention likely saved Henry's life. On the morning following his release, another Ojibwe chief, who was absent at the time of the massacre, arrived in camp and personally slaughtered 7 of the English captives with his knife in order to demonstrate his support for his countrymen's actions. The Indians dismembered the fattest of these prisoners, cooked his corpse in 5 kettles outside the lodge in which the prisoners were housed, and devoured him. Henry's friend and rescuer was invited to attend the ghastly feast, and returned to his lodge with a dish containing a human hand and a large piece of flesh. He did not appear to relish the repast, Henry wrote, but told me that it was then, and always had been the custom among all the Indian nations, when returning from war, or on overcoming their enemies, to make a war feast from among the slain. This, he said, inspired the warrior with courage in attack, and bred him to meet death with fearlessness. With the possible exception of several cannibalistic killing sprees in the 1800s, which the Cree of Western Canada attributed to the diabolical influence of the aforementioned Wendigo, and a handful of war crimes committed during the Northwest Rebellion of 1885, the practice of drinking adrenochrome-rich blood seems to have died out in Canada with the Indian Wars of the 18th century. Canadian consumption of the chemical compound resumed in the mid-20th century, albeit on a much smaller scale, and in a manner far less appalling than its martial precursor. Since at least 1856, scientists have observed that fluids extracted from the adrenal medulla, the section of the adrenal gland which produces adrenaline, turn pink with prolonged exposure to atmospheric oxygen. In 1935, scientists crystallized this substance and dubbed it adrenochrome, a word which means colored adrenaline. By 1942, adrenochrome was being considered as a potential remedy for high blood pressure. Anecdotal evidence described in one academic paper suggests that, during World War II, Canadian field medics who found themselves short on morphine would sometimes extract adrenaline from the adrenal glands of deceased soldiers, allow it to degrade in the open air, and inject its pink derivative into the veins of the wounded. In addition to producing an anesthetic effect, this substance gave the soldiers to which it was administered vivid hallucinations. In 1952, 3 pioneering scientists based in the Canadian Prairie province of Saskatchewan took the world of psychiatry by storm by proposing a biochemical cause for schizophrenia, formulating a hypothesis which, upon further development, would come to revolve around adrenochrome. These scientists were Dr. Abram Hoffer, a Saskatchewan-born biochemist, Humphrey Fortescue Osmond, an English-born psychiatrist, and John Raymond Smithies, an India-born neuroscientist. At the time, both Smithies and Osmond worked at the sprawling Weyburn Mental Hospital in the town of Weyburn, Saskatchewan, a nightmarish institution which we explored in a previous piece, where they experimented on mental patients by administering them high doses of the psychedelic drugs mescaline and LSD. In their paper, Schizophrenia, A New Approach, Hoffer, Osmond, and Smithies noted the striking molecular similarity between adrenaline and mescaline. Knowing from human experimentation and personal experience that consumption of mescaline produced a change in perception mirroring that of schizophrenia, they proposed that the latter disease was caused by self-intoxication, resultant of the body's inability to metabolize some hypothetical substance which the body naturally produces, a sort of intermediate between mescaline and adrenaline, which they called Substance M. The scientists later identified this chemical as adrenochrome. In a later reminiscence, Hoffer recalled the occasion on which he and his colleagues first considered adrenochrome as a potential candidate for their mystery substance. Their eureka moment took place in a small room at the back of a medical library in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, following the very first meeting of the Saskatchewan Committee on Schizophrenia Research. After I had finished my talk, he wrote, Dr. D. Hutchin asked us if we would like to know what that pink stuff was in deteriorated adrenaline. We were electrified at his question. He told us it was adrenochrome. He was probably the only scientist in Canada who knew what it was. He had done research for his PhD with his compound, in England with Professor Burns. Suddenly, we had our adrenochrome hypothesis. Before we delve into Drs. Hoffer, Osmond, and Smithies' disturbing research into the psychedelic effects of adrenochrome, it might be worth our while to touch on the dark story of the Weyburn Mental Hospital and Dr. Osmond's strange connections with Aldous Huxley and the CIA, connections made doubly disconcerting by the proposed association between America's three-letter agencies and the adrenochrome harvesting industry, insinuated by Caviezel and others. Humphrey Osmond's LSD experiments in the Weyburn Hospital attracted the interest of Aldous Huxley, the British novelist whose 1932 novel, Brave New World, depicts a future dystopia in which a small oligarchy enslaves the masses through the chemical manipulation of their passions, whose brother, Sir Julian Huxley, developed the chilling philosophy of transhumanism, which so many members of today's Western elite openly espouse. In May 1953, Osmond supplied Huxley with mescaline and supervised his ensuing psychedelic trip at his home in the Hollywood Hills. Huxley's experience made him a wholehearted advocate of hallucinogenic drugs and prompted him to write his famous essay, The Doors of Perception, in which he professed his opinions on the subject. In that piece, Huxley referenced Osmond, Hoffer, and Smithies' hypothesis regarding the relationship between schizophrenia and adrenochrome. Osmond's work with LSD also drew the attention of the Central Intelligence Agency, which hoped to employ psychedelic drugs for purposes of coercion. 1 month before Huxley's mescaline trip in California, the CIA, aided by information they acquired from Dr. Osmond at the Weyburn Mental Hospital, launched Project MK-Ultra, a clandestine human experimentation program in which hallucinations and psychiatric mind control techniques were applied to unsuspecting test subjects. Throughout the 1950s, Osmond, Hoffer, and Smithies plunged headlong into the fascinating world of adrenochrome, taking a special interest in its effect on human behavior. First, they manufactured the drug themselves, creating what Hoffer described as beautiful crystals which were purplish red, which formed a bright red solution, which turned yellow when oxidized by the oxygen in the air. They then began to experiment on themselves and their wives by injecting the adrenochrome solution beneath their skin and directly into their veins. Their ensuing experiences led them to describe adrenochrome as a more insidious and longer-lasting drug than both mescaline and LSD. Osmond wrote a detailed description of his first trip on adrenochrome inside the Weyburn Mental Hospital. A 30-hour ordeal resulted of an intravenous injection of what he described as a very small dose. After the purple-red liquid was injected into my right forearm, Osmond wrote, I had a good deal of pain. I did not expect that the experimenters would get any results from a preliminary trial, and so was not, as far as I can judge, in a state of heightened expectancy. After about 10 minutes, while I was lying on a couch looking up at the ceiling, I found that it had changed color. It seemed that the lighting had become brighter. I looked across the room, and it seemed to have changed in some not easily definable way. I closed my eyes, and a brightly colored pattern of dots appeared. The dots were not as brilliant as those which I have seen under mescal, but were of the same shape. The patterns of dots gradually resolved into fish-like shapes. I felt that I was on the bottom of the sea, or in an aquarium among a shoal of brilliant fishes. At one moment, I concluded that I was a sea anemone in this pond. Abram Hoffer and a psychologist named Neil Agnew, who were supervising his trip and recording his reactions, then showed Osmond a reproduction of a self-portrait of the artist Vincent van Gogh. "I have never seen a picture so plastic and alive," Osmond wrote. Van Gogh gazed at me from the paper, crop-headed, with hurt, mad eyes, and seemed to be three-dimensional. I felt that I could stroke the cloth of his coat, and that he might turn around in his frame. Osmond continued to trip as his observers brought him out of the hospital to Hoffer's home, finding something sinister and mysterious about the cracks in the hospital floor, and marveling at the grace and brilliance of a lamp he glimpsed through the window of a house they passed in the street. Next morning, Osmond concluded, although I had only slept a few hours, life seemed good. Colors were bright, and my appetite keen. I was completely aware of the possibilities arising from the experiment. Color had extra meaning for me. Voices, typewriting, any sound was very clear. With those whom I felt did not appreciate the importance of the new discovery, I could easily have become irritable, but I was able to control myself. Later, Osmond took a second, larger 5 mg dose of adrenochrome and recorded his experiences. At first, his vision seemed sharper, and as before, the Van Gogh portrait appeared to be three-dimensional. As the day drew on, Osmond felt a disturbing lack of empathy creep into his psyche. "My sister telephoned me," he wrote, "and although I am usually glad to hear her voice, I couldn't feel any warmth or happiness. I watched a group of patients dancing, and although I enjoy watching dancing, with the envious interest of one who is clumsy on his feet, I didn't have a flicker of feeling." As we drove back to Abe's house, a pedestrian walked across the road in front of us. I thought we might run him down, and I noticed with detached curiosity. I had no concern for the victim. We did not knock him down. I began to wonder whether I was a person anymore, and to think that I might be a plant or a stone. As my feeling for these inanimate objects increased, my feeling for and my interest in humans diminished. I felt indifferent towards humans, and had to curb myself from making unpleasant remarks about them. Hoffer's observations corroborate Osmond's self-report. On the occasion of Osmond's second trial, he wrote, "The most noticeable change was his withdrawal from people. After the laboratory session, we drove to my home. Osmond entered, found a chair, where he sat for approximately 1 hour, intently examining the rug. He did not greet the group of people who were at the house, nor enter into the discussion." Osmond awoke the next morning feeling lively and well-rested, and prepared to head to a scientific meeting. He took 2 hours to get dressed. After finding his vehicle in the building's parking lot, with some difficulty, he found himself incapable of driving, and asked the garage proprietor to drive him to work, feeling none of the shame which such a request would normally have induced. "Abe," he wrote Hoffer, scrawling a note in the middle of the meeting, "this damn stuff is still working. The odd thing is that stress brings it on after about 15 minutes. I have this glass wall other side of the barrier feeling. I have a feeling that I don't know anyone here. Absurd but unpleasant. Also some slight ideas of reference arising from my sensation of oddness. I have just begun to wonder if my hands are writing this. Crazy, of course." Following Hoffer and Osmond's preliminary self-experiments, other scientists began administering adrenochrome to spiders, mice, rats, cats, dogs, rabbits, monkeys, and human beings. The drugs were administered intravenously, subcutaneously, by placing them beneath the tongue, by inhaling them, and in one instance, by injecting them directly into the brain. In every case, adrenochrome produced profound psychological changes in the subjects. In a Russian experiment, trained monkeys injected with adrenochrome were unable to complete simple tasks they had performed many times before, even when they were hungry and bananas were on the line. In the Canadian study, rats injected with the substance memorized patterns far more slowly than normal rats. and in an American study, in which adrenochrome was injected into the brains of cats, the feline subjects all slipped into a deep, blissful trance. They would sometimes suddenly look up towards the ceiling or around them, the authors wrote, and then remain motionless, staring into space. After an initial gradual reduction in motor activity, the cats would finally sit in odd positions, with their eyes wide open for long periods, and howl. Other observable effects included mild anesthesia, the spontaneous assumption of bizarre postures, and unnaturally high libido, which in one instance resulted in a doped-out tomcat making amorous overtures to the laboratory dog. The scientists, who injected other cats with LSD and mescaline, observed that adrenochrome had a more powerful and longer-lasting effect on the subject's brainwaves than either of the other hallucinogens. Despite the frantic attempts of the mainstream media to place adrenochrome in the same camp as the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy, this brief glimpse into the chemical's place in Canadian history proves without a doubt that the so-called pink adrenaline is an extremely potent narcotic, and strongly suggests that it has been consumed as a fortifying elixir for centuries. Whether or not there is a black market adrenochrome industry, in which trafficked human victims are subjected to prolonged torture in order to fulfill a vampiric elitist demand, is a question that only time can answer.